In today's investigation, we will look at enzyme catalysis, which enhances the decomposition of a toxic byproduct of cellular metabolism, hydrogen peroxide. The effects of concentration, temperature, and pH on the enzyme's reaction rate will be measured. Using the single hole punch, punch out 30 discs from a piece of filter paper. If you do not have a hole punch, cut the filter paper into small squares. Care should be taken to cut squares to the same size. Place a weigh bolt on the balance and tare the balance. Weigh 2 grams of yeast into the weigh bolt. Add the measured yeast to the 35-degree water and stir thoroughly with the spoon. Consider this the 100% catalase solution to be used for the remainder of the lab. Label one of the medicine cups as 100% catalase. Pour the yeast suspension into the medicine cup up to the 20 milliliter mark. Label the bulb of one pipette H2O2, the second with catalase, and the third with acid, and the fourth with base. Activity 1, enzyme concentration. This activity investigates the following question. How does the concentration of the enzyme catalase affect the decomposition rate of the substrate, hydrogen peroxide? Measure 10 milliliters from the bottle of 3% hydrogen peroxide using the graduated cylinder and add it to the 1.5% hydrogen peroxide medicine cup. Then also measure 10 milliliters of room temperature water using the graduated cylinder and add it to the medicine cup to yield 20 milliliters of 1.5% hydrogen peroxide. Orient the 24 well plate so that there are 6 wells across and 4 wells down. Using labeling tape and a wax pencil, label the 5 wells in the first row across with 0%, 25%, 50%, 75%, and 100%. These labels represent the concentrations of catalase that will be used in each well. Take the pipette labeled catalase and add the following drops of catalase to each well as shown below in the table. Take the pipette labeled water and add enough drops to attain a final volume of 20 drops per well, as shown below in the table. Gently swirl the well plate to mix the contents. With a pair of forceps, take a dry filter disc and dip it into the 0% well. Remove the disc and blot by dragging it across the top of the well on both sides. Start the timer as soon as the disc is placed with forceps on the bottom of the medicine cup containing 20 milliliters of 1.5% hydrogen peroxide. Time in seconds how long it takes the disc to rise to the surface of the peroxide. Stop timing after 3 minutes if there is no activity. The rate for such a run would be considered 0 centimeters per second. Record the time in seconds in Data Table 1. Remove the used disc with the forceps. Perform 2 additional trials with a new soaked disc from the control, 0% catalase. Swirl the well plate again prior to dipping each filter paper disc. Conduct 3 trials for each of the remaining catalase solutions, 25%, 50%, 75%, and 100%. Start with the lowest percent concentration of catalase and move to each higher concentration. Always remove the previous floating disc with forceps before starting the next trial. Record the time in seconds in Data Table 1. For each concentration, calculate the average time required for the disc to float to the surface of the medicine cup. Measure the height of the 1.5% hydrogen peroxide solution to the nearest 0.1 centimeters and record it in Data Table 1. Empty the 1.5% hydrogen peroxide medicine cup into the sink and rinse with water. If Activity 2 will be performed immediately, keep the 100% catalase solution and ignore preparation steps 1 through 2 in Activity 2. Activity 2. Effect of temperature. This activity investigates the following question. How does temperature impact the decomposition rate of the substrate hydrogen peroxide by the enzyme catalase? Prepare a fresh solution of 1.5% hydrogen peroxide by adding 10 milliliters of water to 10 milliliters of 3% hydrogen peroxide in the medicine cup previously labeled 1.5% hydrogen peroxide. Fill a test tube about halfway with the 100% catalase solution. Measure the room temperature in degrees Celsius and record it in the data table number 2 and on one of the 5 wells. Add labeling tape to the 5 wells in the second row of the well plate. Using the appropriate pipette, add 20 drops of room temperature catalase to the correctly labeled well. Soak a filter disc in room temperature catalase, blot and place it using the forceps at the bottom of the 1.5% hydrogen peroxide cup. Time how long it takes for the disc to rise to the surface and record the value in Data Table number 2. Repeat steps 8 and 9 for 2 additional trials. For the below room temperature trial, set up an ice bath by adding an inch of crushed ice and water to the beaker. Place the medicine cup containing the 1.5% hydrogen peroxide in the center of the ice and insert the catalase test tube in the ice beside the cup. Monitor the temperature of the medicine cup by placing the thermometer in the peroxide solution. Remove the cup when the temperature decreases to 10 degrees below room temperature. Record the actual temperature in data table 2. Using the appropriate pipette, add 20 drops of cooled catalase to the well. Soak a filtered disc in the cooled catalase, blot it on the well mouth, and place it on the bottom of the medicine cup. Record how long it takes the disc to rise to the surface. Then remove the used disc. Repeat steps 17 and 18 for 2 additional trials. Discard the ice. For temperatures above room temperature, set up a water bath by adding hot tap water to the beaker. Insert a thermometer into the water bath to track the temperature. Adjust the temperature by replacing some of the hot water with cooler water until the desired temperature is achieved. Total volume of the water in the beaker should be approximately 50 milliliters. Record the actual temperature in data table 2. Place the medicine cup of the hydrogen peroxide in the center of the beaker. Place the catalase tube in the beaker beside the medicine cup. Wait 2 minutes to allow the temperature of the medicine cup to reach equilibrium with the water bath. Using the appropriate pipette, add 20 drops of warmed catalase to the correctly labeled well. Soak a filtered disc in the warm catalase, blot it, and place it on the bottom of the medicine cup. Record how long it takes the disc to rise to the surface. Then remove the used disc. Repeat steps 29 and 30 for 2 additional trials. Repeat steps 22 through 31 for 20 and 30 degrees above room temperature, and record the times and temperatures in data table 2. Activity 3, Effect of pH. This activity investigates the following question. How does pH impact the decomposition rate of the substrate hydrogen peroxide by the enzyme catalase? Prepare fresh solution of 1.5% hydrogen peroxide. Each well comes labeled from the factory with a letter and number to the upper left of the well. Orient the well so that A1 is in the upper left corner. The wells will be referred to by column and row number. Take the bottle labeled 0.1 molar hydrochloric acid and add 20 drops to well A1. Using the pipette labeled acid, dispense 2 drops of the solution from well A1 into well A2 and 10 drops into well B1. Using the water pipette, dispense 18 drops of water into well A2. Rinse each pipette by drawing water into the pipette and expelling it into the sink or into a waste bucket. Using the pipette labeled acid, dispense 2 drops of the solution from well A2 into well A3 and 10 drops into well B2. Using the water pipette, dispense 18 drops of water into well A3. Rinse each pipette, and then using the pipette labeled acid, dispense 2 drops of the solution from well A3 into well A4 and 10 drops into well B3. Using the water pipette, dispense 18 drops of water into well A4. Rinse each pipette, and then using the pipette labeled acid, dispense 2 drops of solution from well A4 into well A5 and 10 drops into well B4. Using the water pipette, dispense 18 drops of water into well A5. Rinse each pipette. Then using the pipette labeled acid, dispense 10 drops of the solution from well A5 into well B5. Rinse each pipette by drawing water into the pipette and expelling it into the waste container. Take the bottle labeled 0.1 molar sodium hydroxide and add 20 drops to well C1. Using the pipette labeled base, dispense 2 drops of the solution from well C1 into well C2 and 10 drops into well D1. Using the water pipette, dispense 18 drops of water into well C2. Rinse each pipette by drawing water into the pipette and expelling it into the waste container. Using the pipette labeled base, dispense 2 drops of the solution from well C2 into well C3 and 10 drops into well D2. Using the water pipette, dispense 18 drops of water into well C3. Using the pipette labeled base, dispense 2 drops of the solution from C3 into well C4 and 10 drops into well D3. Using the water pipette, dispense 18 drops of water into well C4. Rinse each pipette with water. Using the pipette labeled base, dispense 2 drops of the solution from well C4 into well C5 and 10 drops into well D4. Using the water pipette, dispense 18 drops of water into well C5. Rinse each pipette. Using the pipette labeled base, dispense 10 drops of solution from well C5 into well D5. Take the pipette labeled catalase and add 10 drops to each well in rows B and D. Swirl the well plate to mix the contents. With a pair of forceps, take a dry filter disc and dip it into well B1. Remove the disc and blot by dragging it across the top of the well on both sides. Start the timer as soon as the disc is placed with forceps on the bottom of the medicine cup containing 20 milliliters of 1.5 hydrogen peroxide. Time in seconds how long it takes the disc to rise to the surface of the peroxide. This is the control data point. Record the time in data table 3. Perform 2 additional trials with a new soaked disc from well B1. Conduct 3 trials of each of the remaining solutions, B2 through B5 and D1 through D5. Swirl the well plate to mix the solution before wetting the disc. Start with the lowest pH and move to each higher pH. Always remove the floating disc with forceps before starting the next trial. Rinse the forceps with water and dry with a paper towel before moving to a new well. Record the time in seconds in data table 3. For each concentration of acid or base, calculate the average time for the disc to rise to the surface of the peroxide and record the values in data table 3. Measure the height of the 1.5% hydrogen peroxide solution to the nearest 0.1 centimeters and record in data table 3. Calculate the rate for each concentration and record the values in data table 3. Plot your graph. Disposal and cleanup. There are no toxic materials produced during this activity. All solutions can be rinsed in the sink. Wipe up any hydrogen peroxide spills, as they could bleach colored fabrics, countertops, and clothing. Excess hydrochloric acid, hydrogen peroxide, and sodium hydroxide can be rinsed down the sink. Empty hydrochloric acid, hydrogen peroxide, and sodium hydroxide bottles can be disposed of in the trash.